So you want a Nile monitor. So just a little bit about me, why this video is going to be called My Thoughts on a Nile Monitor from a guy who doesn't really keep Niles, even though I have one, which I'll explain some of that too. Um, Basically, it's just been kind of weighing kind of heavy on my heart and on my mind lately because I've been seeing so many people getting or at least asking questions about Nile monitors online. I've had people ask me about them that are friends of mine or friends of friends and things like that. And I'm assuming it's import season, so we're getting a lot of these guys in. The price tag of these little imports is going to be just abysmally low for an animal that's going to cost you a fortune if you're doing everything right, of course. And yeah, so I just kind of want to get into that. So I'm a younger guy. I haven't been, I can't say that I've been doing this since I was 5 years old back in the 70s or anything. This is just kind of my experience. I've only been keeping big lizards just over this past year now. I have a tegu and I have a white throat monitor, both of which are just wonderful and awesome. So I won't claim to be any kind of an expert that's just got all these years and years of experience. You can watch a lot of people online that actually can claim that and do have that. But these are just kind of my feelings on it, what I see, and based on the experience that I have with these animals. Now, I'm fanatical about husbandry and care. For me, it's probably the most fun part of keeping these awesome animals is just the husbandry of it. I really enjoy adding new things or finding new ways to do things. Something about making the setups is just a lot of fun to me. I really enjoy that. So I'm always fanatical about it. If I come in and say, yeah, my hot spot is this, and then I have 5 other keepers saying, yeah, maybe it needs to be this temperature, then first thing I'm doing is finding a way to change it to better help the animal that I'm keeping. So again, I'm no expert with 30 plus years. This is just kind of what I'm doing. I guess when you kind of put yourself out there, I work for the my city for an animal services officer, so I guess I have a reputation for better or for worse. A lot of people know me, and my friend that works up there is people that keep exotics and people that keep big lizards, so we kind of get a lot of experience just based on that too. So that's just a little bit about me and why this video is titled what it is. So I'll show you the Nile monitor that I have, and hopefully we'll kind of get into everything and y'all can see where I'm coming from. So this right here is a Nile monitor. This is the animal that I have right now, and due to some very unusual and unfortunate circumstances, this animal kind of ended up under my care. And just kind of out of respect for the privacy of the family, I won't really necessarily get into it, but basically this animal and quite a few other animals needed to get out of the house and situation they were in ASAP. And most people, being the totally sane individuals that they are, nobody wanted the Nile monitor. There are a lot of other animals that people ended up with, but of course, like I said, most people are sane and nobody wanted the Nile monitor. Now, this one right here happens to be, honestly, a pretty wonderful little individual. I've had it just a little over a week. As skinny as could be, real lethargic, and it's gotten over a lot of that. You can still kind of see where it looks a little dehydrated. We're working on it. He's just got a pretty simple setup and enclosure right now. It's just a 40-gallon, which, you really need to make the enclosures for these guys. But for the most part, he's got a pretty wonderful personality. This is going to be the exception to the rule and not the rule. You can see he's kind of curious. Lots of little tongue flicks, things like that. Undeniably a really cute little animal. Just really striking with its colors. Of course, the camera's never really going to pick up that real pretty yellow that these guys get. Oh, don't fall. And so the big problem with these is people are getting these cheap lizards anywhere between $20 to $60, I typically see. And they're undeniably cute. They're pretty small right now as these little babies. And they grow enormous. They grow to 6, maybe even 7 feet, possibly bigger than that. And being an animal that more than likely has come from the wild,
they're going to have a pretty wild disposition. And that's not anything against them. That's just kind of how it is when you come from the wild, especially from a pretty hardcore place like Africa. When you're coming from the banks of the Nile, when you're fighting for your life from things like Nile crocodiles, and then you come over here, you're probably going to carry a little bit of that survival instinct over. So I don't necessarily like to think that they're aggressive, but they can certainly be very defensive. In fact, when I first picked this guy up earlier, he kind of pooped and peed all over me, and since then he's been really great. But like I said, this is the exception to the rule and not the rule. If you can't handle this animal when it's 6+ feet long because you think it's got a nasty disposition, this is not the animal for you. You don't need to be getting this animal because, well, it was $40 at my local pet store. If you can't give this animal everything that it needs when it's an adult. Now, we have this animal right now, of course, and our goal is to hopefully get it to somebody that really knows what they're doing with Nile monitors, or just monitors in general, and hopefully we can do that. We're kind of in the process of wanting to get our own place here pretty soon, and if by some chance we're able to get one fairly soon, before this guy just gets gargantuan, and we can realistically find a place, it's a possibility that we could keep this animal. But that's what happens. These people, they're going to be getting these cute little animals, and when they realize they can't tame it down, or they realize, oh, it's getting way too big, they're going to rehome them. And of course that puts us in a crappy position too, because we took in this animal as a rehome, and we don't want to just keep rehoming it or anything, because that can stress this little animal out. But you can kind of see the position that you get into when you have something like this. Now, at this point in time right now, I don't really have the space to build an enormous indoor enclosure. If this thing just got enormous, it would have to be kept outside. And yeah, sure, that's something I could realistically do, but then when we do go to move, how on earth am I going to move that giant enclosure, right? So this is some stuff that you really need to consider and you really need to think of before you even remotely consider a Nile monitor.
So what are my thoughts and opinions on importing? What's the big deal about it? Basically, I have maybe a more controversial stance on it. Pretty much every animal that we have in captivity, especially the exotics, at some point in time and the fairly recent past, has come from a wild-caught individual. So your pet ball python, your pet corn snake, things like that, your leopard gecko, at one point in time in that animal's genealogy and its lineage, it had a wild-caught ancestor, right? Now, just about all of those that I mentioned, you're going to find readily available captive-born, captive-bred, because people have been working with these things for years and years and years, and we're able to get animals that have just been removed from the wild by probably hundreds of generations. I couldn't even put a number on that. And that's wonderful. I think that if somebody has the resources, has the knowledge, the time, and the know-how to take on an animal that is imported because they want to make the animal available captive born and captive bred, honestly, I'm all for it. If there's a way to do so sustainably that doesn't significantly damage the amount of wild specimens there are, then yeah, I don't really have much of a problem with it. I just want people to do so ethically and do so hopefully morally. Now, morals here in the United States may be different than in some countries, and I totally understand that. Some of these people that are from different countries, maybe they make their living on catching and importing these animals. And so I can't really have too much of a moral opinion on that because there's a lot of cultural differences there, right? But I know a lot of people that just, they're so opposed, they hate the idea of a wild-caught individual. And hey, I totally understand it. Because if you can get an animal captive-born, captive-bred, you're going to support the breeders. Hopefully you're going to support good breeders, which most people out there are really going to be. You're going to support the good breeders. You're going to support conservation by having that animal come from a captive born lineage, and you're going to have an animal that has much better health and more than likely a much better temperament. An animal that's going to be raised around humans is going to be so much less fearful of them than an animal that was taken from the wild or hatched out of an egg from the wild and then shipped over to a different country, a different continent, and kept in captivity at that point. So what are your options with these guys? You say you want a large lizard, and the price tag of the Nile Monitor is undeniably something that you're going to look into and take into consideration. Well, there are a lot of really, really awesome pet lizards that are out there. Some really large pet lizards that can make awesome pets if you're willing to put the time and energy into it. I just encourage you to look into these things first. In my opinion, the ultimate pet reptile, the best pet lizard that there is an Argentine, however you want to say that, black and white tegu. They're awesome. They get substantially sized. They are known to have great personalities. And for the most part, just about every one of them that you're going to get, at least in the United States, they're going to be captive bred from wonderful breeders. And one thing that I notice a lot about breeders of large lizards is they're putting time and effort into their animals because they know that people are going to want an animal that's a lot more tractable, more social, more tolerable of handling. So these breeders are putting forth that time and energy into these animals. So say you're kind of like me, you love tegus, you think they're cool looking, but maybe they're a little too cutesy. Maybe that sounds a little silly to you, but I've heard that before, and in a weird way, I kind of feel that myself. Tegus, they're cool looking. They look kind of like dinosaurs, but yeah, you see them all the time. Everybody's got one at some point now. They're kind of cutesy looking because they'll just hang out with you and cuddle with you. You want a monitor lizard, right? You don't want the little cute friendly dinosaur. You want the dragon. Well, there are some wonderful monitor lizards that are readily available, captive born, captive bred. I encourage a lot of people to look into Ackie monitors. Ackie monitors are going to stay a lot smaller, so you're going to not need as much by way of the enclosure, the amount of light you're using, the amount of food that they're eating, and all of that stuff. I think they're awesome. I don't have any myself, so maybe you don't like that the Ackie monitor is a smaller lizard. You want the dragon. You want something really cool. Well, guess what? There's something that's out there that is very similar to a Nile monitor that you can get captive bred, and that's going to be an Asian water monitor. I encourage you to look places like New England Reptile Distributors or NERD. They have wonderful and awesome monitor lizards. Here's the caveat to that. You're going to pay for that. You're going to pay for a large captive bred lizard. And if that's what you want, and if you're willing to put forth the time and effort, it's going to be worth it. Absolutely. You can look on their website to see how much they are. They're going to need a lot of the same things that these little Nile monitors are going to need. They're going to need an enormous enclosure. They're going to need an enormous water fixture, the UVB if you choose to keep them inside, or a place where they can bask outside if you choose to keep them outside. And they're known to have a much better disposition than the Nile monitor. And a lot of that is because we know how to take care of them in captivity. We're getting a lot more of them captive born and captive bred. And when you remove an animal so many generations from the wild, you're going to get a pretty personable animal for the most part. You can watch Nerd's videos. They have a lot on socializing your monitors. It's mostly geared towards those water monitors. But it's impressive. It's so cool to see these little animals that are just so... their fear of humans is just so far removed because they've been born and bred in captivity for all these generations. I'm not even sure what generation they're up to now, but it's fantastic. That's something I absolutely encourage people to look into. Maybe you don't want an Asian water monitor. Maybe you don't want to go through that crazy enclosure with the large water fixture and all of that, because you're going to need filtration and all sorts of crazy stuff with it, right? Maybe you don't want one of those. There are still great monitors out there, captive born, captive bred, that are that large size, that have good personalities. I encourage you to look into things like black throats or white throat monitors. I'm a little bit biased having a white throat, and I think that they're wonderful, but you get something with the white throat, you're getting something that's fairly large, not quite as big as a Nile monitor and not quite as big as a black throated monitor, but you're getting something that's really large, really impressive. You're getting something with generally a really good disposition, and almost always now you don't really see babies, at least in the United States, being import. They're pretty much all captive born, captive bred, and that's wonderful. There are a lot of medium-sized monitors too that people can look into. Again, captive born, captive bred. You can get things like roughneck monitors. Most of the black roughnecks are all going to be imports, but there are the brown roughnecks or the Dumerils monitors, and I see those captive born somewhat regularly. And you're going to pay more for it, but you're going to get an animal that has more than likely been worked with, that's been raised around humans, and if you get a good breeder, which most of these guys that are working with these larger lizards are going to be, you're not going to have any of those imported problems like parasites and sickness, disease, and all that. You're going to get a rock solid, healthy animal. You can look into things like Argus monitors, another pretty cool monitor that kind of on the larger end of what I would consider a medium size, not necessarily a true giant, but they get really large to be pretty impressive, and you're getting a lot more of them captive born, captive bred, so you're getting some that have those better temperaments for the most part. So in conclusion, what do I think of the Nile Monitor? I think they're one of the coolest monitors on the planet, one of the coolest lizards, and that's saying a lot because lizards themselves are just friggin' cool, right? I think that if you can put forth the time and energy, and if the Nile Monitor you think is the right monitor for you, seriously, with all things considered, then it could be the absolute coolest and best pet lizard that you could possibly have, bar none. I mean, if you're willing to put up with a lot of, I don't really like saying issues, but with a lot of the behavioral things that a Nile Monitor has, then yeah, by all means, they might just be the coolest animal you could possibly get. And I encourage people to have the animals that they want. But look into these things like these other captive bred animals that I just mentioned. And if you are somebody that is breeding Nile monitors, seriously, let me know. Let everybody know, because we need you guys out there. A lot of the reason that I don't, at least in my opinion, what I think, why I don't see Nile monitors being bred so much in captivity is because as a breeder, it's going to be so hard to compete with a $30 to $50 lizard that was imported from the wild. If most people are going to gravitate towards that, it's hard to really make a living off of that. If you're breeding enormous lizards, you're going to need funds for all of its food, lighting, and everything. And it's going to be hard to compete with a lizard that's imported for so cheap to where you're able to make a living. You're going to need to probably charge, I would imagine, $200 to $300 at least for captive bred Nile monitors, and most people aren't going to be getting those. And honestly, maybe that's a good thing, because if the price of these guys started to skyrocket like that, I think a lot of the people that are getting them now would maybe stop and reconsider. Because if you're only getting an animal because that cheap price tag, that is just the very, very start of it. Save your money for a captive bred individual. If you're 100% set on a Nile monitor, find somebody out there. I know that they're out there. I just don't know of anybody. I rarely, if ever, have seen anybody, even online, that's selling a captive bred Nile monitor. Captive hatched, sure, that's another thing. That's mostly going to be these imports. But a true captive born, captive bred, if you can find it, let me know. Honestly, I'd be all about it. If somebody could hit me up right now and say, hey, I've got a captive born, captive bred Nile Monitor, hit me up. I'd probably be interested because they're cool lizards, undeniably. But please consider some of these alternatives to this cheap lizard that you guys are getting. If you can find one captive bred and that's really what you want, by all means go for it. But think about it. Really think about it, because the cost of that lizard is just the first thing. All the other costs begin right afterwards. And if you can't handle that lizard that costs $50 because, well, maybe its temperament isn't so great, or, oh, wow, making this cage is starting to cost a whole lot of money, then you don't need to be having that animal. Working in my line of work for animal services, I see it all the time in cats and dogs. People can barely seem to take care of those. And these lizards are absolutely no different in the regards that they need everything that any other living animal needs, and more specific care than some other animals too. And if you're not willing or able to provide that, this is not the animal for you, and don't get it. Again, I think it should be your right to own what you want, but really consider the animal, consider what you're getting yourself into, and consider the health and well-being of the animal that you're getting. And that's when you're going to have a much better time, is when you and the animal are both happy and healthy, and you can appreciate and understand each other. So, in conclusion, this is just a lot of this stuff that's been on my mind here lately about the Nile Monitor. I think they're awesome lizards. I really, really do. But please, please reconsider the $30 to $50 pet lizard in favor of something that's more available, captive born, captive bred, because I promise you, you're going to have a much better time with it. Anyway, this has been long-winded enough. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoy. If you hate it, let me know. If you like it, let me know. And if you guys want to hear me rant about anything else, hit me up.